Thank you indeed for a wonderful face-to-face conference, Dr. Fatima and the Sharjah University team. To be frank, I'm amazed that quite a few people seem to be still here. And it's my pleasure to talk about a topic which is very relevant to many of us here. Let me tell you, if you want me to express myself, the commonest skin problem that an Indian dermatologist faces today is dermatophytosis. If I see, let us say, 50 patients in a day, 25 patients will be having dermatophytosis. And this is the same story for all dermatologists in India. And what I have discovered is that it is the same across the entire subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Of late, I have seen a lot of Filipino patients, even Egyptians, and a few local patients also, with extensive dermatophytosis. Therefore, the prevalence and incidence of this condition is astonishingly high. And I would say that the epidemiological data on this is really sparse, and we need to buck up and catch up on this issue. The talk is going to be about glabrous tinea. Now, the word glabrous tinea is quite confusing, though the Indian Association of Dermatology and Venereology has decided to call this as glabrous tinea. I would say that you can call it as tinea cruris corporis et generalisita. Glabrous skin is skin on the palms and soles and non-hairy areas. But basically, this is dermatophytosis which occurs on almost all the body surface except these hairy scalp, the beard, and the nails. And the prevalence of multi-drug resistant dermatophytosis is astonishingly high of late. So my objectives is to talk about the basics of dermatophytosis, how to recognize the current alarming glabrous tinea, lab tests and diagnosis, just a basic outline, that's all, and the current management plan. I don't want to bore people with too much detail, so the meeting outline is basics, glabrous tinea, clinical aspects, methodological aspects, and question and answer. I don't need you to read these slides at all, just relax. Life originated from the sea, we all know that, and then primordial life divided into various kingdoms, which we have divided artificially. And we know the animal kingdom, we know the plant kingdom, we know that the fungi belong to a different kingdom. How do fungi basically differ from the other kingdom? Fungi are basically heterophytes, that is, they cannot generate their own food, heterotrophs, sorry, and they are basically eukaryotic. They have a nucleus and a nuclear membrane, and their cell wall is made of chitin. Now, they actually use nutrition by an absorptive method, where they can actually absorb food from the exterior. The main thing is that the prominent sterol in the plasma membrane is ergosterol. These points are of importance in our understanding and our ability to identify a fungus. Therefore, fungi, as you know, can be non-pathogenic or pathogenic. The pathogenic ones are yeast, molds, and dimorphic fungi. And the identification is based on just scrape and look at the fungus, the morphology of the fungus, culture it. We all know the Sabbros dextroseca. We know that it has so many modifications. We culture it, use biochemical tests and identify it, species profile it. And then nowadays there are any number of molecular tests. You have an RT-PCR to identify dermatophytes. There are sophisticated gene probes, and there is something called Sanger sequencing of internal transcriber spaces or region of ribosomal DNA, and translocation of elongation factor TEF1 alpha gene can be used to specifically identify species, especially in dermatophytes. Why do I mention this? Is all this possible in a clinic? Yes, it is. I myself am doing it, and I have a lot of patients whom I have scraped, and I do routinely a KOH in fact, and sometimes we do a culture. But of late I have been sending a lot of my samples to Germany to Professor Peter Nenhoff, who is an expert in gene mapping and who is actually helping me do even the drug resistant studies. It was Professor Shyam Verma, whom I met in the last conference, who actually led me to get into this kind of a study, and it has been pretty rewarding. So, what are dermatophytes? Dermatophytes, as the word itself means, are fungi which love skin, keratin. They come from the soil, and then they can be on animal skin and they can be on human skin. Basically, you have three groups: the geophilic, the zoophilic, and anthropophilic. But here, what I would like to remind everybody is, like I said, life all started from the sea, and we all know Charles Darwin. And the Darwinian theory of evolution is by natural selection. So, if you remember Darwin, you can almost do the entire topic here. So, basically, all these things are living things. What is the largest living organism in the world that we know of? To be frank, it's a fungus. There's a huge fungus which occupies the entire continent of South America, in fact. A large part of the Amazonian Sea, which can be seen from the sky. So, the largest morphologically biggest living organism in the world itself is a fungus. A fungus can be microscopic and can be gigantic too. And it's a living thing, and it is something that actually has survived natural selection, and it is evolving on a daily basis, and it is very smart thing. So what has happened is, with climate change, the cycle of evolution has led us to a new era where we are facing mass extinction of life. A number of living things are dying, but things which are smart, like the fungi, know how to live. They actually have evolved genetic transformations which have confirmed drug resistance. In fact, one of the biggest problems we face in dermatophytosis is drug resistance. And we know that almost many strains are totally resistant to terbinafine, 100% resistant to terbinafine. Fluconazole, candidiasis, we know, is resistant to fluconazole. There are many strains of candidiasis which are resistant to fluconazole. In fact, there is a type of candida which is found in the ICUs, which is a killer, almost 100% drug resistant, and in an ICU patient with a systemic candidiasis of that type, nowadays we are facing almost 100% death. And I know a lot of patients in India who had COVID and who have died because of mucormycosis. Therefore, fungi are not something to be ignored. Fungi are something which by their nature are something that we need to be very, very careful with. Like I said, we identify it by culture, we identify it by KOH, and we identify it by micrological tests and biochemical tests and the modern tests. The KOH is a simple test, and the KOH is something that every dermatologist should learn and should know how to do it. And I won't go into the details, just to tell you that this is a learning curve, and you should know how to differentiate a branched and septate dermatophyte with arthrospores from artifacts, and you should know how to use India or other contrasts to look at it and identify it. It's a very, very simple technique and very easy to do, and the culture also, the spores, the micro or macroconidia, that's what tell us the species. Of course, Muslim, this is of use only in capitis, and I would like to rapidly go into the clinical aspects. So like I said, the epidemiological aspects and the clinical aspects of tinea have undergone a massive change. See, there has been almost a drastic shift in the species which affects human skin. It's no longer Trichophyton rubrum. What we find is Trichophyton mentagrophytus or interdigitae, especially the Trichophyton mentagrophytus type 8, which is multi-drug resistant, has almost taken over as the predominant species, which is anthropophilic in nature, and it is multi-drug resistant. And one of the biggest problems we face is that free availability of fixed drug combination topical antifungals with the steroids, which it seems make it grow at a very wild rate. So again, clinically and mycologically, so many changes. The most important thing is it catches up fast, the groin, the pubic area, the thighs, the buttock, and it seems to spread by direct contact. It comes on the palms, the wrist, the face, the ear sign, and the fact that the lesions are pretty difficult to diagnose because steroid modification is very common. The inflammation seems to be much less. The advancing border is not always visible. In some areas it's visible, in some it's not. And inflammatory lesions are very common. Extensive spread is very common. And the penile skin being involved is very, very common, which was never found earlier. The extensive involvement and the inflammatory lesions and these dumbbell-shaped lesions, and the fact that you have inflammation at the edges, and you can see the kissing lesion here on the scrotum also, and the fact that multiple topical steroids are used, and they actually are part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And see, the ill-defined, almost totally unrecognizable tinea incognito. We call it tinea incognito when we cannot identify it as a dermatophyte clinically. Whereas if it is partially recognizable, that is called as a steroid modified tinea. There is no central clearance. See, this has double-edged border. This is very, very common. Multiple waves, that is typical of steroid involvement. Inflammatory lesions, deeper lesions, Majorque's granuloma. All these are almost a daily aspect nowadays for us. It's not as if you come across this case once in a month or once in 6 months. You name it, you go to any dermatologist, Indian dermatologist, you will see the patient almost on a daily basis. Tinea capitis, the glabrous type. Tinea capitis was thought to be a pediatric infection, but no. With the current massive invasion of this dermatophyte onto the human arena, we find that a common type of ringworm on the scalp is very, very common. And like I said, the spread by direct contact, palmar spread. The sixth finger doesn't seem to have it, which is pretty interesting. But then direct contact, spreading with the ear side, involvement of the ear, which is very, very typical, and then involvement of a non-circumcised genital head also, which was not seen earlier, and pseudo-imbricata, that is the multiple waves. And all these are almost a daily thing. Multiple definitions have been there. I would like you to look it up. I don't want to go through each and every one of them. But the Indian Association of Dermatology and Venereology has given specific definitions for what is a relapse, what is a recalcitrant infection, what is a recrudescence, and what do you mean by chronic dermatophytosis, what do you mean by a nail case. So interesting definitions are, clear-cut definitions are there. Terminofine resistance, what do you do if you find it? Terminofine resistance is very common. In fact, I was saying in an Indian patient now, there is no point in starting terminofine at all, systemic. It is very, very common, and only in a totally naive patient, if at all, can we actually consider giving terminofine and 250 milligram per day for 3 weeks, and if within 3 weeks there is no improvement, double the dose to 500 mg, because otherwise it almost doesn't respond. When you double it, keep in mind the hepatotoxicity of terbinafine. So, if we do an antifungal drug test, we can easily identify mutations of squalene, epoxidase, and gene, which is common in trichophyton. Actually, intradigital and trichophyton mentogrophytus are confused in the literature. To be frank, it's trichophyton mentogrophytus type 8, which has been called as interdigital by many mycologists. And the nomenclature is becoming clearer of late. And the standard treatment doses which are found in Brooks' textbook and most of the other textbooks no longer work. Almost none of these schedules will ever cure a patient in our experience. The general measures are important, personal hygiene is important, washing clothes, avoiding wearing wet clothes, washing clothes in 60 degrees centigrade, putting them out in the sunlight, wet mopping the house, avoiding wristbands, avoiding the jeans and other clothes, and then keeping the food, the clothing separate. See, it was not common for dermatophytosis to spread sexually, but now it is a sexually transmitted infection. It's very common, just like scabies. If the husband has dermatophytosis, the wife invariably picks it up. And it goes to the child also. So the entire family has to be screened and treated. Unlike scabies, where we treat empirically whether they have or not, empirical treatment of the family members is not required, but it's imperative to investigate the entire family and treat. When you come to the topical agents, there's no big choice among the topical agents. All of them seem to work very well, or not very well. In fact, of late, topical therapy alone almost cannot cure a dermatophytosis. The rule of 2 is very important. 2 centimeters outside the clinically apparent area. Start from the periphery, go to the center, apply it for 2 weeks beyond the clinical cure, and all these are there. But then, to be frank, topical therapy is not of much value. So we end up with having to give systemic therapy. And among the systemic therapy, itraconazole of late seems to be the only medication which seems to have some effect. And even here, the dose and the duration seems to have changed. And we find that itraconazole 100 milligrams twice daily, and sometimes beyond 3 weeks. So the rule of the thumb is that you should treat the patient till complete clinical cure and follow up the patient 4 weeks later to make sure that there is no relapse. 4 weeks later, if the signs appear, that means there's a relapse. So itraconazole 100 mg twice daily. Remember, itraconazole can have hepatotoxic reactions, can alter the serum potassium level, and has a huge list of drug interactions. Keep in mind before you prescribe, and make sure you investigate the patient thoroughly. Nowadays, we are forced to sometimes even add 200 milligrams itraconazole morning and night, which is off-label, but I did hear a British mycologist say that they use this standard as a liquid form of itraconazole 200 milligram BD for 8 weeks. And there are so many publications and articles where they have used 1 month of isotretinoin along with this as a captolytic agent, and they have found success. And special scenarios like pregnancy, lactation, infant and children, elderly, and people with systemic diseases are there. I won't go into that because I would like to talk to that about that with individuals if they are interested. So the future scenario is that multi-drug resistant strains are going to become ubiquitous. All of us need to start doing possibly the higher level tests like the RT-PCR to diagnose dermatophytosis. Because so many patients look totally different. They look like eczema or psoriasis. You will never think that this is a dermatophyte. And you need to do drug-resistant studies as a routine. And for the youngsters, this is high time for you to do research and to come up with new molecules and new medications and new algorithms for the treatment of dermatophytosis. So I think with that I will conclude today. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you so much. This was very informative. Unfortunately, we are